Hi, I'm Don McCulley.
And I'm Andrew Kuykendall. Welcome to another episode of This Stuff is Complicated.
And Andrew, I got to ask, that shirt's got a lot of complications on it.
Well, it's a complicated funk band called the Motet. I got to see them at one of my favorite venues in all of Portland, the Get Down. And they did an incredible show with the entire second set was Jamiroquai covers. Now, as a standalone band, well over 20 years, half a dozen or more albums, plus all the live stuff, they just released an album called Love Time. And one of my favorite tracks off of that is Thinking Too Much.
All right, then. Well, today's topic is organ transplant versus no new laser rate contracts. And in this industry, there's a lot of conversation about no new laser, and organ transplant is overlooked. So let's talk about the origin of each. The organ transplant cover started about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Some guys, this company called Medical Excess, which became AIG, which is now HCC Life. They invented a fixed fee transfer of risk to a separate carrier that would pay for organ transplants. And the way they set it up is they had their own little private network. So it came down to utilization management. That is risk transfer at its finest. It's the best example of risk transfer because it takes it off our stop loss contract and moves it to a separate insurance policy. The no new laser rate cap, that is purely just a financial performance measure. You're just capping a rate when a catastrophic event happens, and it's a 1-year thing. Organ transplant can be renewed, and it can be renewed in the middle of a transplant. I had an employer once in New England a couple years ago. They called me up and they're like freaking out, like, what do we do? We're getting a 20% increase on our organ transplant product. I'm like, well, you've got a heart transplant. I think you should renew. I think it's a good deal. And they looked and said, oh, we see that now. So the risk transfer portion of organ transplant largely overlooked. The reason it's overlooked is because of the complicating factors, right?
And I think the no new laser aspect is sort of a market evolution because as people become more interested in exploring stop loss captives, level funded, other opportunities, they're concerned about controlling that risk. Whereas the organ transplant 25 years ago came into being, and there are now multiple carriers, there are multiple solutions around that exact item. So of the two, it seems like organ transplant's a little bit more mature in the marketplace.
Yes, and you raise a good point. They're both filed products, right? Organ transplant is a renewable product, and it's fixed rate. The no new laser rate cap is a 1-year product. So if it's not a 1-year product, if someone's saying it's longer than that, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about insurance products that requires an insurance license to sell, covered by errors and omissions insurance. Anything else is not a topic of conversation today.
And while we're being technically correct, my favorite kind of correct, it's no new laser on renewal.
Okay, what's the complicating factor there?
Let's say you purchase another company or bring in a new business unit.
All right then, and that means those people are excluded from your no new laser rate cap?
In many instances, that is correct.
Really? So what about if someone wants to raise your rates but not give you a laser? And it's a rate cap. Are there any chicanery around that?
First things first, read your policy.
Okay.
Read your reports, read your policy. You know who I am.
Right, but you've always talked about like, well, what if they raised a specific limit and say, well, this is still aligned with the rate cap? Does that fit in a filed policy? Because I don't think it does.
Not in a filed policy.
Okay. And so that's one of the complicating factors. The really complicating factor for organ transplant is the BUC aspect, right? So United, Cigna, Aetna will cooperate with that utilization management. So the organ transplant policies have separate networks and they have negotiated contracts. So I remember when reference-based pricing came to be the du jour, right? When no new lasers du jour today, the soup of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we can do that cheaper. Yeah, but this is a risk transfer policy, right? In the no new laser rate cap, which is filed, that doesn't care what the network is. But utilization management cares inside organ transplant because Blues and Harvard Pilgrim, for instance, do not cooperate in my experience. They may have changed because today's a Tuesday or a Thursday. It's another day that ends in a Y. Things and rules could change, right? We know that. But historically, those have not cooperated with the utilization management required to conform with the provisions inside the organ transplant policy, because the organ transplant policy is a hand-holding policy. It helps the family members arrange transportation. It helps them get, places to stay near where the transplant's happening. It is a soup to nuts solution that goes ground up. So it's treated like a fully insured policy. So basically what happened when the Affordable Care Act happened, some of the regulators said, we want that to conform with medical loss ratio. So in some states, that was cool. You could still do that policy. So in the most well-known organ transplant policies are 37 state solutions. There's one 50-state solution out there.
And when we talk about these solutions and organ transplants, the number that we use consistently is 66 per 100,000?
Yes.
However, across our book and in Clear Captive over the years, it's not uncommon for us to see 1 or 2 lasers in a 100 or 200 life population. And if you have a 500 life population, it's almost rare to have no lasers.
Right, but we're going to talk about laser pools in another episode, because what we wanted to cover today when we're talking about organ transplant versus no new laser is really 3 things. What's the origin of each policy, right? That one is risk transfer and the other is a financial protection, and they're very different in that regard, because the risk transfer can be renewed and the financial protection is on renewal, right? So that's unique. And then the complicating factors about the contracts, which networks they cooperate with, where it works, and how important it is, because although it's a frequent event at 66 per 100,000, it's not an everyday event. But for the people going through it, as we always talk about on the other side, it's someone loved one, right? I'm Don McCulley from Medical Captive Underwriters.
And I'm Andrew Kuykendall. Thank you for joining us for this episode of This Stuff is Complicated. If you enjoy what you're seeing, share it with your friends.